If I can go back and give my younger self some advice about money, I'd probably save myself a lot of stress and probably a little bit of money. But today I wanted to share the five biggest lessons I wish I knew in my early 20s. And, this is for the guys out there, whether you're just getting started or, you're already on your financial journey, your financial adventure, whatever you want to call it. I feel these can make a huge difference. So feel free to stay tuned. I think the first thing I wish I knew earlier on in life, even probably before my 20s, was starting early with investing, even if it's a tiny amount. I used to think you needed a lot of money before investing made sense. I thought you needed a lot of money to invest. It was only for rich people. It was only for people who were already making, quote unquote, the big bucks. But the truth, really, you can start as little as like $25, $50, $100 a month. It really adds up over time, over the years, big thanks to compounding interest. But if you're waiting for, the perfect time to start, don't, I don't recommend that at all. The earlier you start, the less you actually need later. Like I said, I wish I started this probably, even before I got a job, I would get birthday money, I would get Christmas money, holiday money, whatever the case may be. And, even when I did get my first or second job out of high school, I didn't really invest much. I just kind of stuck it in a bank account. And, I could have put that money to work. I could have let that money compound, and then I would have had those couple extra years of compounding behind me. But, hindsight's 2020, this is for the younger guys. Hopefully they hear this. And before it's too late, I guess. I've battled with this next lesson a lot, and, I kind of still do a little bit. Living below your means. I used to personally think frugality meant like being cheap or missing out on adventures. Like, hey, like you have to completely cut that stuff out of your life. But really, living below your means gets you to that freedom goal faster. It's what allows you to save money, invest it, create options for yourself. Maybe you want to start a new business venture. Maybe you want to start a side hustle. That little extra money you saved working, your normal job could allow you to end up making more money, or it just allows you to have more freedom in life because maybe that side hustle, just really picks up and you're able to, work less at your main job or maybe quit your main job entirely and, end up making more money with the side hustle, which may even be less work than your original job that brought in income. So, when I finally understood that every extra dollar I spent on stuff that I didn't need, like fresh out of high school or, during high school, me and my friends would go to school, maybe we'd go to a football game or like a volleyball game and we end up going out to eat. And then after we went out to eat, we went out and got ice cream. And then we just kind of shot the shit the rest of the night. Even at college, I would go out and drink, every other weekend or go out and party every other weekend. I was just spending a lot of money and, I didn't realize at the time, but I spent a lot of money on stuff I didn't need. And I really, now that I look back at it, although I had some experiences, you really don't forget, I ended up realizing, I could have put more of that money towards my freedom, which totally changed my mindset there. I feel living below your means goes perfectly with this next lesson, which is avoid bad debt. This one's pretty simple. Bad debt will cripple you in the long run, whether that be credit card debt. You're paying for a vacation you can't afford at the time. You're just putting it on a credit card at 30% interest rate. Car loans for that big fancy truck that's going to cost you $800 a month because you want a big truck, or you want that sports car that's going to cost crazy insurance. You're going to pay $800 a month to pay for it. Lifestyle inflation, you get out of college with a decent job and you move to said city, you get an expensive apartment, you just lifestyle creep, you end up going out every weekend, partying, having a good time. It all eats away at your future. You have to remember, what this money, what this early money can do for your future. I've personally had moments where I almost slipped into that trap. I'm kind of in that trap currently. I'm paying off a car right now. although, I could pay it off fully right now with my money that I have saved up. But based on the interest rate of the car, it didn't really make sense. It'd make more sense to just kind of put some of that money in the market and then just pay the monthly bills, monthly payments on the car. But I'm paying off a car loan. I'm glad I caught myself in some areas, instead of going to a 4-year university, right out of high school, I went to my local community college. I saved a lot of money on my first 2 years. And, I was able to work during all 4 years of schooling. So that was able to kind of keep the loans away, keep the payments down. And, I'm not to brag at all, but, I ended up graduating, with zero debt, with zero student loans. And, seeing a lot of people my age, maybe the younger people, they're going into college, taking out tens of thousands of dollars of loans. And, especially with the current administration in the White House, you're not able to, you're going to pay those loans off. I completely agree with that decision. I don't think you should be able to take out hundreds of thousands of dollars of loans and not pay on them. But, I'm not trying to make this a political video, but, that's my 2 cents there. But anyway, I'm glad I caught myself in a lot of those situations. But, debt isn't always bad. There's good debt, there's bad debt. But in your early 20s, bad debt can really snowball fast, and it can weigh you down for years to come. This next lesson, I will be the first one to admit I don't apply this one as much as I should be doing. And it's invest in yourself first. The best investment, you besides stocks or crypto, is in yourself. Whether that be skills, knowledge, education, side hustles, trying a side business. Those things can end up making you more money than any quick investment ever could, especially in the long term. I definitely wish I understood this earlier, that the ability to earn is just like compound interest, especially, as you bring in an income. The earlier you build those skills that pay the big bucks, whether it be in technology or sales, finance, accounting, and any really important skill that every business, every person needs, it will definitely pay off in the future. It'll pay for itself. It pays off a lot faster than stocks would be, especially if you plan on investing for the next 30, 40 years of your life. So just don't forget to invest in yourself first. Don't forget to, I guess a lot of people can say, don't forget to pay yourself first, whether you want to level up your skills, especially me being in the tech space. I can definitely put a bigger focus on leveling up my skills, especially in like cybersecurity, the different paths you can go into cybersecurity, whether that be new certifications, new trainings, courses, whatever the case may be, guys. Just always pay yourself first before you pay bills, before you invest in stocks. Last but certainly not least, in any regard, financial freedom, I believe, is and will always be greater than flexing your status, I guess. And success isn't about flexing a new car, flexing the new watch or fancy stuff, clothes, new house, new boat. It's about having options. Financial freedom is about having options. Being able to say no to things you don't want to do. You don't want to work overtime at your job. You don't want to pick up extra shifts. You don't want to work the late shift. You don't want to come in on the weekends. You don't want to need to get a second job to pay the bills. Peace of mind will always beat looking rich every single time. This is my personal opinion. This is the opinion of a lot of people I surround myself with. Maybe you're the complete opposite. Maybe you live to flex. You want to have a nice car. You want to have a nice watch. You want to have a nice house. There's nothing wrong with having that, but doing it, like grinding this out, making smart money moves for the sole reason to flex, who knows, I guess to each their own, really. But I feel, having that peace of mind, having that freedom to say no to anything I'd like because I'm financially comfortable, I feel that will beat looking rich every single time. That's my opinion. Would love to hear yours in the comments. And, I wish I really realized sooner that real wealth is about freedom, not showing off. You can make $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year, But at what point does it cut into your freedom? Are you working 60, 70, 80 hours a week? Are you constantly on the road? Are you constantly on call? Do you have any time to spend with your family, your friends, your loved ones? At one point, you have to find that equal balance where, sure, you make a nice income, you do well, you're able to support your hobbies, your activities, but you're also able to spend time with your family. You're also able to invest a heavy chunk of that for your future, where you're not just killing yourself working every day. So those are the 5 things I personally wish I knew about money in my early 20s. 26 going on 27 this year, a little scary, but if I really started applying these back then, when I was just getting into my 20s, or even before 20s, before even 18, I would 100% be way further than I am ahead today. But, hindsight's 2020, guys. You really can't dwell on the past. You learn from your mistakes. Now you can guide the younger people in life. You can guide your younger siblings, your cousins, your nephews, your etc., your friends, your friends' kids, whoever. But the good news is, it's never too late to start, and it's never too late to change. It's never too late to change. So I'm curious, what is one thing you wish you learned earlier about money? It could be any of these 5 lessons I provided in this video, or if you got one in particular, feel free to drop it in the comments. I always love to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions in the comments, and I always love to interact with you guys. Appreciate the support as always. So wrapping it up here, guys, if you found this helpful, if you thought this video was helpful or entertaining, or you just stuck around for the Clash of Clans gameplay in the background, either one, feel free to stay around. Feel free to stay tuned. I'm constantly releasing new videos every Monday and Thursday at around 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So as always, guys, feel free to check out the other videos on my channel. But I'm going to end it here. The Lunch Table, out.